How does someone rise within the ranks of one of the most competitive and creative industries on the planet? What does it look like from the inside of the legendary NBC Page program? How does someone lead a multi-billion-dollar business? And is the future of advertising as AI takes hold a good one? And for who? We'll explore the answers to those questions and beyond during this episode of the Career Journey podcast, No Wrong Choices. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by my collaborators, Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. But before we kick off, I have a request. Please be sure to follow our show on your favorite podcast platform and to give us a 5-star rating. This support enables us to keep growing and to keep bringing these great journey stories to life. Now let's get started. This episode features the advertising and marketing executive Greg Castronuovo. Greg has worked for powerhouse media properties such as NBC, Fox, and the WWE, and served as president for some of the largest ad agencies in the world before founding his own company, Venti Marketing. Larry Shea is the creative soul on this program, or at least one of them, and I think marketing, advertising, creativity, you're the right person. Take it away. Lead us into this one.
Yeah, when I think marketing and advertising executive, I think Hollywood, right? I think movies, right? Nothing in Common with Tom Hanks. He's the big ad executive. And Mr. Mom, Terry Garr, is the big ad executive. And it's all about the pitch, right? You got the clients sitting in the room with their arms folded. And you got to make them appreciate the creativity of what you bring to the table, right? There's guys making mouth noises about trains and stuff, and you got to sell it, right? It's about the sell. So I'm so curious to see if Greg's life really relates to that Hollywood image that you have of an advertising executive.
All right, so have you guys ever watched the show 30 Rock? Very popular show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so in our research, I've learned that Greg was actually a former page over at NBC. And his rise, I think, a lot mimics the character of Kenneth, who was a page on that show. Jack Donaghy, the character that was played by Alec Baldwin, which he said, "Hey Kenneth, one day you will run this network." And I'm very surprised that after looking at Greg's, his rise through that company, through NBC, I'm surprised he's not running that network. But he has been so, He's so talented, and some of the things he's worked on. We'll get to it. We'll get to it in the interview. I mean, he has been able to actually, really carve a terrific path for himself within the field of advertising. So much so that he was able to branch out, create his own company, and now he works with some of the big movers and shakers in the industry. It's really, really inspiring.
Yeah, and for me, I've known Greg for decades. He's a very talented, brilliant guy who knows everything about this business. So I'm sure we're going to get a roadmap to some very interesting stuff.
He's also a fan of the show, right?
Absolutely. In fact, he recently sent me an image of his top 4 most listened to podcasts in 2024. We made it.
That's big.
So I guess this is payback in a way. Greg, thank you. Here is Greg Castronuovo. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I am quite humbled. I know how many wonderful people you've had on this show who I think are 10 times more successful than me. So I just really appreciate you even thinking about me.
Well, we would all disagree with that statement, and let's move beyond that. So
yes, I'm sure you're very interesting as well. My God.
You are very interesting.
That's it. Interview's over.
Okay, we're done. We're out. So, Greg, I gave the broad introduction, but you take the mic. Who is Greg Castronuovo? What do you do? And I guess give the short elevator pitch about who you are and just set this up for us.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a dad, right? I'm a family man. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a brother. I'm a friend. And then all the work stuff. So a couple years ago, right, after COVID, I started my own consultancy, Venti Marketing. And I work with brands, I work with publishers, I work with platforms to figure out new ways to grow, to optimize their marketing and media, and to help them in their journey as companies, as brands, as individuals, to be better at what they do.
So how does that work? It's so funny. We're getting ready to do this interview, and it's like, he's an ad executive. He's a strategist. He's a marketing strategist. How does this all work together? Talk about the job in general. I think of an ad guy, I think of the old movies, right? Pitching some idea to a big company and trying to get that company to sign on board and the whole thing. And you're doing like Foley exercises and stuff, you know? Is that just silly, or is it so much more vast than that? Get into that a little bit.
Yes. When I was on the agency side, I was doing a ton of pitching. I mean, I pitched clients across every category. We weren't purely a creative agency. We were a media agency, but there were times when we brought creative people to the table and we had to pitch more than just, like a broadcast spot or a print ad or a billboard. You had to pitch creative ideas and creative campaigns. What were you going to do that was going to be innovative, that would break through with the consumers that the brand, the client was trying to reach, right?
Yeah.
So we would spend months, weekends, hour upon hour brainstorming and coming up with various ideas for clients like Levi's and Clorox and Wells Fargo and CBS Television Network and the CW and Activision and just you name it, all different types of brands of all different shapes and sizes.
Was that your strength? Was that what you were good at? Or was it the other stuff?
Not in the beginning. In the beginning, I absolutely was horrified at pitching and being in the room and commanding a room. I had to grow into that. But by the time I was, a couple of years into my agency life, I really started to love that and lean into it. And I realized that I had a deep curiosity and passion to understanding how brands worked and how clients worked and how their businesses worked. And I loved learning about it. I also loved working with the team over those many months or weeks and coming up with those innovative and interesting ideas to win over that client. And when you won, you were on top of the world. But when you lost, you were just, you had to go find some way, an outlet.
After putting in all that time for no reason, right?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of time, a lot of money. And losing just was terrible. And that's one of the reasons why, I committed myself to having a better success rate than a loss rate. It's motivating. Loss is more motivating than winning.
That's a very true statement there. I mean, it's the truest statement of all. So let's take it back to the beginning when you were young. Were you more of a creative kid, or being around, let's say, a father who is very much of a scientist, very much of probably a thinker, I want to say, is a methodical thinker. Did that rub off on you as a kid, or were you more of a creative type?
That's a really good question. And when I really dwell on it and think about it, my dad did a lot to bring me into the office with him. And you would think, okay, so you walked into a doctor's office, you walked into a hospital. Well, later on in his career, when I was just kind of getting into middle school, high school, if I remember correctly, he was at the forefront of nuclear medicine, right? And working with imaging and 3D imaging. And so I do remember him bringing me into the hospitals and into where he worked and seeing how this innovation was saving lives. And innovation has been a hallmark of my career ever since I've been in this marketing world. It's something that clients crave, and it's something you always have to bring to the table. You always have to reinvent yourself to stay relevant and, again, to break through with consumers. So I think early on, it instilled in me this idea that you always need to know what's new and next. And it was very relevant in medicine, and it's very relevant in marketing.
Stick it on your childhood. Did I also read that your great uncle was a notable American advertising photographer? Is that true? Talk about that.
You guys are really good. You read the website. My Uncle Tony, he was my great uncle. He was my godfather. If you're Roman Catholic, you know what that means. Forget about the Italian, definition of that.
Hearing music in the background right now.
I have a lot of vowels in my name, but it wasn't like that. But he worked in Manhattan, and he worked with some really big brands, like Columbia Pictures, and he shot, some really big actors, and also did work with cruise lines and with CPG brands as well. And he was a very notable photographer. And so on the one hand, I had my dad taking me into the hospital, seeing all this innovation and what's next in computers and imaging and 3D. And on the other hand, we're talking, the 80s. I had my Uncle Tony. I'd go to his house and he would show me these spreads he would be doing for Food and Wine magazine, and really innovative stuff that he was shooting for Key Art. And I think, both, I never really realized this until later on in my life, but both probably mashed up in my head at some point and became who I was as a marketing executive later on.
As a kid or as a young person, marketing is all about storytelling. Were you a storyteller as you were growing up?
No, I was a pretty shy kid for a bit because we moved around a lot. We moved from Florida to New York, and it took me a little bit to get my footing. I got involved in a lot of stuff when I was in high school. I was that enigma, kind of that anomaly who worked on the creative side, and not worked, but did creative stuff in high school, but also played sports. So I'd come off the baseball field and I was actually a good singer. I had a good voice. Don't ask me to sing.
Break in a song. Show us one.
So before High School Musicals were cool, I was actually in some High School Musicals. So I don't know. I didn't worry about the stigma of it. I just did it. And I was nervous as hell. I was always shy. I always made mistakes, but I still did it. And I got up there and I sang some songs in front of the entire auditorium of parents and kids. And I don't know even to this day how I mustered up that courage, because I was not, let's say, a gregarious guy.
So your time in school, obviously you fed a bit of that creative side to you, and you said you went to Washington and Lee actually to pursue pre-med.
Yeah.
What was it that turned you off to the medical side of things?
Organic chemistry.
Isn't that for everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That'll do it.
I think I was sitting in the library trying to memorize all these molecules for a test the next day, and my brain just kind of melted and dripped out of one of my ears, and I was just like, I this is not what I want to do. I don't know why I'm doing this. And I had exposure to the journalism side of things, and the J school there was an accredited J school. They had Pulitzer Prize winning professors. It was super interesting to me because I'd never been exposed to anything like that. I wasn't on the school newspaper in high school or anything. And so, I just knew that I wanted to go in a different direction.
That first time when you first got into broadcasting, whether it be, I think it was the college radio station, what was that moment for you where it just kind of clicked and said, you know what, this is a road I want to go down, a road I want to go down?
Yeah, there was just a certain fun in it, which I didn't have in any of my pre-med pursuits.
Right.
So, and camaraderie, and the people were just engaging, and everyone had kind of this sense of purpose, and they were joyful in kind of what they were doing. And so it was contagious for me. I don't know. I don't know how else to articulate it, but I was very attracted to it.
Did you eventually want to go? I mean, you kind of mentioned this before, but did you want to go into broadcasting? Because you did major in journalism and communications. Because I mean, I can see that leap from I want to be a broadcaster to I want to go into advertising. But sometimes there's a middle portion to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to be a journalist. I was going to write for a newspaper. I wanted to be, Bob Woodward. I studied under Clark Mollenhoff, who was Pulitzer Prize winning journalist for the Des Moines Register, and he was one of the guys who helped, break and investigate Watergate. So yeah, I was pretty motivated to be an investigative journalist. And when I was able to, through one of my J school professors, get the internship at NBC Sports, it really opened my eyes that there were all these other jobs within the broadcast world. And then when I became a page, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about, it really opened my eyes to understand that there's a whole business behind the business. And I became I became just as curious and passionate about understanding the business from a sales and marketing perspective as I did when I was trying to pursue investigative reporting and journalism. And I kind of was seeing where journalism was going, and it wasn't really ringing my bell that much. The punditry, the BS that we see on these cable news channels today. I'm so glad I didn't go down that route, because I just don't think news is what it is today.
It's not as newsy as it once was, that's for sure.
No, for sure. It's all entertainment. It's all about the ad dollars.
Infotainment, right.
And rating points.
Yeah, so why not just do that for a living and forget about trying to worry
and not worry about the
journalism.
Objectionable content.
Yeah.
So, as you're coming out of school, you eventually wind up in the Page program. Is that the first thing you did coming out of college?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got back WNL was on trimesters. So I got back from the spring internship at NBC Sports. I hope my memory serves me right. And, back in the 80s, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have any of this, quick way to engage with anybody or send them your resume or post it on LinkedIn. So I had met some pages during that internship, and I said, well, how do I apply for that? I was sending my resume to newspapers throughout the country, to affiliate networks throughout the country, trying to see if I could just become a desk assistant somewhere, right? And it just so happened that my father went to medical school with a guy who lived in LA, who was a dear friend of the family, who knew someone who was a producer on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And he put me on the phone with her. We had a lovely chat. And she said, I would be happy to, send your resume over to the head of the Page program back then.
Wow.
And I got a call, so yes, connections are everything. And, I owe it to my dad for having that connection. And I'll mention his name. He's no longer alive, but Frank Marshall was like my West Coast dad. I lived in New York, but he was on the West Coast, lived in Sherman Oaks, and he took me under his wing and he said, yeah, we're going to find you something. And I initially interviewed for the Page program in Burbank. And they said, we're going to send you back to New York because, you're not going to be able to afford to live here. You're going to have to live with your parents. And that was almost a deal breaker for me. I was like, what? I'm going to have to commute from Long Island to New York. I want my independence. I want my freedom. But I went to New York. I interviewed in New York. And I think it was literally a week or two before graduation, they called me up and they said, we'd like you to start. And it was the Monday after graduation. I said, is there any way that I could start a few weeks later? They said, nope.
No way, man.
No way, man. You gotta go. So the day after I got back from Virginia and I was in New York on Long Island, I started commuting into the city and I was at 30 Rock.
Wow. So for those people, I'm very familiar. I worked at NBC Sports a long time ago. So to me, the Page program is like this thing that people aspire to, and it's a big deal. But for those people who aren't familiar with the Page program, please just share what that's about, why it's exclusive. I know a lot of famous people have been in the program. Give us a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, and it's funny because, coming out of college, I didn't know I had a respect for it, but I didn't really know about the legacy and the amazing people that had come out of the program, both executives and actors. Like Michael Eisner and, Aubrey Plaza was a Page, so both sides of the business, right?
Yeah.
That was
Superman, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah. Possibly. I don't know.
I thought Christopher Reeve was.
Yeah, Christopher Reeve. Was he okay?
I think so.
Regis Philbin.
Yep.
So in front of the camera, behind the camera. And that's the whole point of the Page program. And it was, I couldn't believe that I had the privilege to be able to put on that jacket and to walk the halls of 30 Rock, And for me, it was about getting as much exposure to the whole business, not just one piece of the business. Like college can teach you only so much. So I needed that exposure. I needed to understand so much more. I went on assignment, not only with, things like Letterman at the time, but also in sports sales. right? And so I was able to really get this three-dimensional view of the business, and it's what I needed. And also network with people, no pun intended, but meet people who potentially could become my hiring manager in the future. And that's exactly what happened. So the Page program is a brilliant thing. It's an amazing program. It's changed a lot from what I've heard. I think it's harder probably to get into than it was back when. I think they get thousands of resumes. And it's a pretty rigorous process now. You're not just interviewing with one or two people, but there's a whole committee of people you have to go through to get in. And they've shortened the program a little bit. I think when I was going, it was like 18 months. So you had about 18 months to land something. But the point wasn't necessarily to just get a job at NBC. The point was to potentially get enough experience that you could leverage that and maybe get a job elsewhere as well. I happened to get lucky. I wasn't very picky. I wasn't looking to get into the broadcast side, the production side, the creative side. I had friends of mine, one of them who has become an Emmy award-winning writer. He was a Page friend. He's no longer, I don't know him now, but we used to sit in the hallway. We were poor, so we would eat like tuna fish out of a can together. And he ended up writing for SNL, writing for Seinfeld, and writing some big movies. And I could tell at the time when I met him and I was a Page with him that he had that singular focus, that he was really focused on what he wanted to do. I wasn't. I was like, okay, let me look around a little bit, knock on a few doors, talk to a few people, and really figure out what I want to do. And I went on assignment in sales, and I saw what these guys were doing, and they were having a hell of a lot of fun and making a lot of money. And that was very attractive to me.
You know, it's so funny you telling that story, and we do know about the Page program from one of our previous guests, and it just, you can hear the reverence and you understand how prestigious it is. But I guess my question is, do you ever look back and, see that fork in the road and say, I wasn't going to get paid. I had to live back with mom and dad again. Like maybe I wouldn't have done that, how things would have turned out differently. I mean, I expect it didn't take you long to see how important it was once you were in the door. But it sounds like there was a real decision there of, do I really want to do this?
No, it's actually the opposite. I look back and I say, how lucky was I? Like that I didn't get in my own way, and I made the right choice.
Right.
And I did that. And then, as a kid right out of college, I mean, back then when you do 5 tours on a Saturday, then you would work audience control for SNL. And then you would actually be invited to the SNL cast party. You'd party till God only knows when. And luckily they had a Page lounge that had a shower and lockers. You'd shower up and you'd do another 6 or 7 tours on a Sunday.
Wow.
And, even that just gave me the ability to present and speak in front of 17 people inside an elevator at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and the first few tours I did, I was nervous as heck. Right. And you stick to the script, like to memorize a script. I was so nervous. I would say one thing wrong and there'd be like a plant on the tour that would bust me and say, no, that's not what happened in 1942. And and once I relaxed and I realized there was nobody spying on me, we started to have fun with the audience, and you try to get a reaction out of them and get them laughing and maybe tell a few fibs or so and just to embellish and make them have a better tour and a better experience. But you never forgot that you were the tip of the spear as far as the brand itself. You were always representing NBC, and you never would do anything to besmirch the brand or besmirch the company. So you would have fun to a point, but you would never go overboard.
Your years as a Page were when, roughly?
1990 is
So
when
you were
so
there.
it was,
So you were there probably during the Will Ferrell years. So
Church Lady.
Yeah, Church Lady, the Dana Carvey near the end of the Dana Carvey runs, things of that nature.
Yeah.
What are
little
some of
Eddie
the great
Murphy.
stories? Yeah, what are some of the great stories from that era? So many great people in that point.
Look, I was still very respectful, and I didn't really mingle with the talent. Like, they sometimes at the parties they would rope us off, right? But there were a couple of moments where I walked into Studio 8H, and there was a rehearsal. There was an audience rehearsal about, I think it was 8 o'clock on Saturday, but there was an even earlier sound check rehearsal for the musical host that night. And I was a big Clapton fan, my entire life, high school, college, everything. And I walk in, and there's Eric Clapton performing "No Tears in Heaven," who just became, a big hit for him. And obviously, the story behind that song. And I felt like I was the only one standing in Studio 8H, and I had that jacket on, and that jacket with the NBC logo on it was your all access pass to the entire building, and everyone respected that. I could go anywhere I wanted to go. I couldn't walk into a control room or an active live show and disrupt it. But if there was a rehearsal going on or anything going on, I really could walk the floors unfettered.
Can you keep the jacket? Do they give you the jacket to take? Is it like the Masters? You got to keep it at the golf course?
Or like your varsity coat from high school or whatever?
That's a funny story. That's a funny story. I kept the jacket for the longest time. And then, you don't make money as a marketing guy, as an advertising guy for a lot of years, right? So I needed a blue blazer.
Oh, that's great.
I painstakingly took the NBC logo off.
Wow. Get out of here, really?
Embroidered thing off the jacket. And I used that as my jacket to go on job interviews and to go to work for a while.
You still have the patch?
I probably do.
You should have left the patch for job interviews. Like, there's a page.
Fast forward many years later, CBS was a client of mine for a decade. In fact, I just had lunch with the former CMO, George Schweitzer. He was with CBS for, I think, like 48 years. And he was my client. And I should have walked in with my NBC Page jacket one day. He might have fired me, but it would have been hysterical.
Well, you took the jacket. What did you use it for? You talked about interviews. What did it help you land? What was next?
Yeah, I've been so fortunate that there have been so many wonderful people who saw something in me and gave me a chance and mentored me throughout my career. Funny enough, I was in Florida and I ran into the guy who gave me my first job at NBC Sales, a gentleman by the name of Mike Mandelker. And I went up to Mike's table. I said, "I can't believe it's you." And I said hi to him. And he said, what made you take a chance on a shy young kid like me to, get a job, even though it was like a sales associate job at NBC? And he said, "I was always told that the pages were already vetted and they were the best and brightest, and you could never go wrong hiring a page. And, that's why I hired you." And he said, "And look, you turned out great." So, and I thanked him for giving me my first real job in broadcasting.
So what's year one like? What's year one like for a young advertiser? A young person going into advertising. A young person going into advertising. What's year one like?
Well, I was supporting all of these sales account executives who were selling NBC primetime, NBC daytime. And, at the time, that was the gold standard for advertising, was that advertising time. And I think as a basis for my career in advertising, understanding the value of what that commercial time was and understanding how it got bought and sold was really important. I needed to know that. I needed to know that these advertisers were fueling the entire business. They were paying for the talent. They were paying for the production. They were what was the starting point for anything that came after that, anything that you got to watch at home. Without those sponsors, without those advertisers at the time, there would be no program, right? So we took it very seriously. And again, I had some really great AEs who taught me everything they knew. They were 20, 30-year veterans selling broadcast television, and they were very forthcoming with me about how that worked. I had one AE in particular who was inspiring to me. Her name was Laura Nurse. And I made one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my career. And she really taught me a lot with the way that she treated me after I came forward and told her about that mistake. It was back in the day, you had to fax the plans to ad agencies for, the upfronts that they were purchasing. Basically, I know this is terminology. I don't want to get too deep into it, but the commercial time that they were buying, we're talking millions upon millions of dollars. And there was always a back sheet to the plan that the advertiser would see, that the ad agency would see. And that back sheet was kind of the backstop, the lowest price that the network was willing to go. And you never shared that back sheet with the ad agency. So what did I do? I faxed the front end of the back sheet to J. Walter Thompson.
Oh, no.
And the minute I found out, and I don't know, to this day, and this is just the way I operate, and it taught me a valuable lesson that this is the only way to operate. I marched into her office and I said, I know this is probably going to get me fired, but I did the unspeakable. I faxed over the wrong sheet. She kind of took a pause and then she said, when did this happen? I said, 3 seconds ago. I found out, I went back to the fax machine. I found it. And she said, hold on 1 second. She got the person on the phone at J. Walter that she had a great relationship with. And she said, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to throw that second page out. And I'm going to tell you why. And she told him why. And that person said, yeah, no problem. I get it. It happens. And, she knew that person could go to their boss and their management and say, this is what we're going to get. And they didn't. And because of that, probably saved my job and my career going forward. But she kind of looked at me after she hung up the phone and she said, it really tells me a lot about who you are as a person. And I trust you implicitly now. And she said, just don't make the same mistake twice. And I said, I won't, never will. And I never did again. So it inspired me, like there was someone who could be that empathetic in business and wasn't going to throw me out the window for making a stupid mistake.
On the other side as well. Yeah. Meaning at the ad agency, that they did not take advantage of that. That just shows the strength of the relationship between them as well.
Yeah, that was a testament to Laura, right? She knew that the most important thing in sales and in business as a whole is relationships. And she had great relationships. So I really, by mentioning her name, I don't know where she is and what she's doing or anything like that. I haven't stayed in touch with her, but I honor her with that because it was a defining moment in my life.
Sure. That's a great story. And it's a good story that she, didn't fly off the handle and said, it tells me something about you. You keep using the word selling, sales. How much of this is sales? And early on in your career, I guess, did that come easy to you? Is that something you had to work on?
No.
Talk a lot about that because sales is a very particular thing. Sell me this pen,
Yeah, and so much so that I realized that it wasn't what I really wanted to do because it wasn't who I was at the time. I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the courage to stand in a room and do that. I wasn't a natural born salesperson. And so as a sales associate, you work behind the scenes mostly, but every once in a while I get to meet clients. And I did see that I had a strength in making connections and creating friendships with people on the agency side and the clients, which is the first step in sales, right? But it kind of drove me there was a spiral staircase from the 47th floor to the 48th floor at 30 Rock. And I was on the 47th floor in sales. And there was this team upstairs called the marketing department. And there are a couple of guys running the marketing department. And I said, let me go up there and peek around. My old Page kind of mentality was with me to say, there's a lot I still have to learn and I have to understand about this business. And I went up there and I met, two gentlemen, Barry Goodman and Alan Cohen, and they were running NBC Marketing on the East Coast at the time. There's a whole West Coast promotional team that we can get to later. But those two guys we're doing some really interesting things. I mean, big promotional things, helping to promote shows like Friends and Seinfeld. They were putting together comedy tours. They were working with big clients, like Kellogg's, to help promote some of the shows, some of the biggest must-see TV shows at the time. And there was a creative energy that just was really attractive to me. And I said, I got to get to know these guys, and I really want to work in this department and be a part of some of that. And at the time, the company had just been, sold to GE, and there was a big hiring freeze, and these guys were trying to hire a manager of sports marketing. And I said, well, I worked at NBC Sports as an intern, I was a page, maybe they'll consider me. And they looked at me and they said, look, you're just a sales assistant. We're not going to make you a manager. But a few weeks went by and they realized they couldn't hire outside the company. And they came down the spiral stairs and they said, hey, we'll give you a shot. We're going to kind of lower the level to like an administrator or something like that. But why don't you come and work with us? And I was just like, wow, unbelievable. I can't believe that worked.
What an opportunity.
I fooled them into hiring me.
Yeah.
And then, they became two of the biggest mentors I had in my career. Fast forward, I was promoted to manager finally, and they put news marketing under me. So it was news and sports. And then this little thing called the internet started to happen. And again, going back to that original kind of innovation exposure, I had a fascination with what was going on with all the online services, with the web and the internet. And Barry and Alan knew that I was, kind of dabbling in that stuff. And Alan really saw the future in it. And we started to do a ton of work. And because I was doing sports marketing, we brought Notre Dame. We had the Notre Dame deal at the time. I worked very closely with the sports information director at Notre Dame, and we brought Notre Dame online. I think it was with AOL at first, and then it gravitated over to the internet. But started doing that and really started to get recognized as some guy who knew what the hell was going on. Like I knew how to plug in a 9600 baud modem, and so they said, "Well, why don't you become our director of interactive marketing?" And it was crazy. I still can't believe they promoted me into that role. And so I started doing all of this stuff. We started working closely with AOL. Then we migrated over to MSN and Microsoft. I found myself on the Microsoft campus with all of our affiliates, porting all of our affiliates online. Wow. It was a really active, crazy time in the business, and transformative time.
Yeah.
And I had a front row seat to it, and it was just unbelievable.
When you're a person who is essentially the first to be at the vanguard of the internet in terms of advertising and in terms of marketing, you obviously had a wide berth or the ability to make mistakes, mistakes more than anyone else, especially in such a frontier at that point. That's obviously changed now over time. But when you're the first person in and you get to see that kind of a landscape, what is that like in terms of, I guess you're kind of explaining to everyone what is going on here and how it's going to eventually, filter out. But that notion of not everything has to be perfect straight away because you're the first one there. You're allowed to make mistakes. I mean, what kind of freedom does that give you?
You are, but you have a lot of naysayers, right? So the biggest obstacle was getting people to understand what the hell it was.
Right.
Right. And we were so enthusiastic. And I think because we were in marketing and we were always thinking about what was new and next, we just had this intuitive understanding that this was going to be big, and this is where our consumers were going to be. And this was another platform for us to market our shows and to get the word out that was much more robust than a 30-second commercial or a billboard on the highway or even a magazine spread. Like we just knew like this was going to be big, and our enthusiasm carried the day to some degree, but you would run into these brick walls sometimes in different departments where they would look at you and say, this is ham radio. It's going to go away tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just a hobby.
The flash in the pan type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I talked to some pretty big execs who will remain nameless, who, and it took them a little bit longer to understand it. And in the first few months, maybe even year, you just got no, we're not going to waste our time. We're not going to spend our time doing this. And it was just persistence, and then the market catching up a little bit, where the phone would ring and it's like, hey, can you teach me how to hook up my modem in my office? This is the same person who would tell you, there's no way we're going to spend time on this. Don't bring it up in a meeting again, blah, blah, blah. And, so we would just move down other pathways and avenues, and where people were more receptive and they understood and they let us take those chances. So we did make some mistakes. We did a lot of chats with AOL. I'm not sure how many people actually showed up to those things. I mean, we had Olympic athletes like Jackie Joyner-Kersee doing chats on AOL. We did all sorts of stuff. Quincy Jones and LL Cool J at the time, and we experimented. We weren't necessarily looking at the numbers per se, but we were saying what's going to work, what's going to break through, because we knew in 6 months to a year that would become the big thing, and we would already have the knowledge of how to do it. So
what was the next chapter then after that?
Well, Alan and Barry left to go to ABC. And I had a new boss all of a sudden, and we're in a meeting one day, and he said, I'm looking for somebody to become our East Coast ambassador on the West Coast and work with the West Coast promotions folks, and be our director of entertainment marketing. And my wife is born and raised in California, and we were living in Manhattan at the time, which we both love. And I couldn't raise my hand high enough. Again,
I would assume you jumped out of your chair.
Putting on the old page hat, I was like, there's still more I need to learn. I was a sponge. I was like, more adventure, more thrill ride. Put me on the roller coaster. Let's go. And I wanted to live in LA. It was the original intent of why I interviewed in Burbank as a page.
And now you no longer have to live with your parents.
Well, at that point I had moved on.
You were out already.
Yeah. But, there was this allure. And I knew, look, if you wanted to really understand the show business and entertainment, you had to be in LA, right? It was the center of the universe at the time. So, and my wife was just thrilled to be able to get back to, closer to her family. We made that move, and I became the director of entertainment marketing. And then even more amazing, not more, but just, more people that were amazing came into my life, who took me under their wing and taught me other aspects of the business that I didn't even have any inkling of an idea existed.
I love how you just said you were a sponge and you're soaking it up, and we can hear you talking about you're learning from everybody. You're just gathering information and growing. When you moved to the West Coast, how long did you stay in that position, and what was next for you? Did you have your sights on something else at that point? What was that? Or did it just come about naturally?
It came about naturally. The first more than half of my career, I was ambitious. And there were times when I had offers and I almost left to leave because we were getting noticed with all this sort of stuff we were doing. But what I got a phone call from Fox. I think they saw some of the promotions we were doing, and it had been 10 years plus at NBC. And when you work for a company and you grow up at a company like that, especially in entertainment, I saw people coming in from the outside who were being valued more than me, right? Especially from a salary perspective. And I knew I was underpaid, but I was a sponge and I was there to learn. I was ambitious in a different way. I knew the money would come. It wasn't necessarily at the front of my brain, although it was definitely at the back of my brain. And Fox came calling, and they, on the eve of the series finale of Seinfeld, I remember that vividly because I wanted to go home and watch the show. I went and interviewed over at Fox, and they literally called me the next day and hired me.
Wow.
It was tough. It was a tough transition because I went from a place where everywhere I went, I had a mentor. I had someone who was looking after me. And, while we did a lot of great things at Fox, sure, I would say it just wasn't the same je ne sais quoi. It was just a little bit different. It was more of a startup network at the time. I mean, obviously they didn't have NFL at the time. I believe we're talking about 1997.
Like
I
99
want
or
to say
2000, I believe.
98. So, but The Simpsons was a big hit. I did a lot of work with Party of Five and 90210. Again, going back into a promotions role where I was bringing network clients like Dr. Pepper to the table and meeting with producers of those shows and saying, you've got a show that's 7 years old, but Dr. Pepper's willing to invest $7 million if we co-promote the show together. And most of those producers would be like, hey, Greg, let's do that. That's great. Because the show that's 7-8 years old at a network is not necessarily getting much investment from the network anymore.
Right.
Right. So that's the sort of thing I was doing. We did some big promotions with the Billboard Music Awards, with Sprite, and had a lot of fun in Vegas for that. So a lot of stuff, but I didn't stay that long. About a year into my gig at Fox, where I would say I was getting a little bit like, okay, I've been 11 years in broadcast. There's all this other stuff going on. Mobile was emerging, all this stuff. I was dealing with managers and lawyers and publicists and talent relation managers, and some of them were just not nice people. And it was very difficult because you're at a network. A lot of the shows you're renting, right? You're basically buying the rights to put it on your air, but you don't have, as a marketer, really control over a lot of the parts of the show, like the talent. And it's very difficult to navigate that unless you have people who are really, team players. And so I get this call from Jim Byrne. He's like, hey, when are you in New York next? And I was traveling an awful lot back to New York for a lot of reasons. And I said, oh, I'll be in New York next week. He goes, let's have lunch. I said, sure. Sit down with him. And he describes this VP of marketing role at the WWF. And this is before they'd gone public. And, the Attitude Era was just kind of starting. Stone Cold was big, but The Rock was just getting started. And I said, that sounds like a really great job, Jim. I'll think about anyone I might know in New York or on the East Coast that would be willing to take on that role. It just sounds terrific. I'm not a big wrestling fan, so it's I'm happy on the West Coast, and things are just getting started with Fox, And he's like, oh, that's too bad, because that's who I had in mind for the role.
I've never been a bigger wrestling fan in my life.
Yeah, me. So I'm not a fan, right? So and my wife is from California, and I'm like, I'm not going to move you back. 4 years later, I think it was, back to New York for wrestling. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not, my marriage is more important to me. So Jim said, look, we've got a show. We got the Royal Rumble at the Anaheim Pond. Why don't you and Carrie come? We'll get you some good seats. And then I'll introduce you to some of the people backstage. I had no idea he was going to introduce me to Linda and Vince McMahon. I also had no idea how historic in the wrestling world that night was, because it was the first time Vince, I think, fought in the ring. And I'm standing in his dressing room backstage, and he walks in, and he'd just taken a chair shot. He's got blood all down his face. And I'm like, I'm looking at Jim like, really? You want me to come work for this company? And Linda's there. Linda's looking at Vince, and she's like, if I've told you once, I've told you a million times, don't get hit in the back of the head, or I can't remember, one of them. You got a harder spot in the front of the head, I think.
She's telling him the best place to get hit in the head.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was up until that point, I was talking to Linda, and then they very politely said, you guys probably should leave until Vince gets, cleaned up. And Vince comes out and he interviews me. Basically we stood for a half hour in the bowels of the Anaheim Pond, and he looked straight into my eyes and he asked me lots of really smart questions. And I didn't know it at the time, but the entire time I was talking to Vince, Carrie, my wife, was talking to Linda. And so I'm done with Vince. I say goodnight to Jim. We get in the car. We're sitting in the car at the Anaheim Pond. All the cars are gone because the show's been over for a while. And I'm just, we haven't even started the car yet. And Carrie looks at me and she goes, so what did you think? I said, this is crazy. Like, I this is like joining the circus. I said, I don't know. I really don't know.
Really? Wow.
And I looked at her, I said, what do you think? And she goes, I think you should do it. And she told me why. She said, as a marketer, they are an independent studio. They own the brand and the marks and the IP end to end. And you'll be a kid in a candy store with the work that you do and the promotions and the ideas that you come up with, and I started thinking about that, and that clinched it for me. And I left. I left Fox. I broke my contract and left Fox. And, they let me out of, I should say, they let me out of my contract. And we moved to Connecticut. What I didn't know at the time when we were sitting in that car was that my wife was pregnant with our first child, and we had no idea. And I was the heel, to use WWF parlance, that was going to be taking her away from her family 3,000 miles away.
Oh man.
But she was very invested in the decision, and she knew that it would be the best thing for my career, which, by the way, she had her own career. She was a very successful financial advisor. And so there was a lot to consider, and she couldn't have been more supportive. And that's why she's the best.
So was making that move a great thing for your career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a roller coaster ride, and there were some really crazy moments, things that just, I just can't even comprehend looking back at them. 2 weeks into the role, it was about 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'm in Kansas City when Owen Hart, at 34 years of age, falls to his death. And and I'm the VP of marketing, and my boss is in Europe. And the guy who was our manager of PR was best friends with Owen. And he was completely, as he should have been, torn apart and really couldn't function. And I find myself backstage with Vince and Shane McMahon, and they look at me and they say, what do we say? And I'm not a PR guy, haven't been. And I'll still say to this day, as much PR as I did for that company, I'm still not a PR guy. And so I had to counsel them. I'm not going to get into exactly what, I said on the spot with them. And then we had to set up a press conference in St. Louis the next day because the show went on. And we all held hands on stage and memorialized Owen. It was how I got to meet most of the superstars and the talent and the production crew at the WWF at the time. And it was a jarring and very difficult way to be introduced into the company. And everything after that seemed easier. There's nothing as hard as that has happened in my life, in my career, I should say, as that night, and being put on the spot and having to provide counsel to people who, were incredible marketers themselves and intuitively knew, how they should manage that situation. But, as the VP of marketing, I was the guy responsible for, putting together at least that press response. And that was a big challenge.
Moving away from obviously that very tragic moment, you were there essentially for the birth of the Attitude Era. You were right there in the middle of it. And as you said, your wife said you should take this gig because, well, it's the handcuffs are off, right? There you can do whatever you kind of carte blanche to do whatever you want. So what was that like? Because I mean, obviously, my time in wrestling, although my father was a huge wrestling fan, I remember watching Bob Backlund, Bruno Sammartino, Hulk Hogan. The Attitude Era of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, etc., those guys, that was most memorable for me. So I can tell you how enjoyable it was to watch on television. What was it like for you behind the scenes when you had no real guardrails in some senses?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, and the first couple of years were terrific, and we knew we had a purpose, we had a goal. The marketing department was responsible for the pay-per-view P&L, right? So it was the first time I really ever had P&L responsibility, and we were really looking at the metrics and the business from the ground up. We knew, pay-per-view was a rough business, and the percentages weren't great. And so you had to hit certain numbers with the pay-per-views. At the time, we were doing one a month, and of course, culminating in WrestleMania. But we were also, the show Raw was really starting to pick up in the ratings, and we had to work very closely. A lot of people don't know this, but at the time, the WWF was selling most of its commercial time. And so, we were really more like a network who owned the property. And so we worked very closely with the networks, UPN at one point for SmackDown, USA Network for Raw, and making sure that, they were a great partner and putting together, just as much energy and effort and time and money into the franchise as we were. We had to support live events. We had to support licensing. Shane was running the up and coming digital marketing department at the time. And then about a year into working there, we actually went public, and we went public on the NASDAQ first. And then the next year we switched over to the NYSE. And when we went public on the NASDAQ, we went public the same day as Martha Stewart. And she had put out this huge buffet outside of Wall Street for all the brokers to eat and feed. And I think Vince saw that, and he said, when we go over to the NYSE, I want to do the same thing. And we put a ring the middle of Wall Street.
Wow.
And we had brokers sitting out their windows as, the Big Show and Rock, fought in the middle of the ring. I can't remember exactly.
In the middle of Wall Street.
In the middle of Wall Street with pyro and music and everything. Pre 9/11. It would never happen again, I don't think. But it was a spectacle. And to be a part of that was just an amazing, amazing moment in my life and career.
So you were with the WWE, I think it was about 4 years.
Yes.
Right. First of all, what's the decision like to leave there, Vince and his cast of characters? I mean, that had to be a tough decision for you. But how are you making that decision, and what comes next?
It wasn't a tough decision because it wasn't my decision.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. First time in my career. I think I was 16, 17 years into my career. And, we launched the XFL without an XFL dedicated marketing department. So our day job, we used to joke, our day job was the WWE after we rebranded the company with the campaign, Get the F Out.
That's a great campaign now.
But what happened was, at night we would put on our XFL hat, literally, and we would start doing the marketing for XFL. It wasn't until the actual league launched, until they actually hired a head of marketing for the XFL. And man, so many stories to tell about that too. But suffice it to say, it didn't work out, which you learn a lot more from your failures than from your successes. And so there was a pretty big culling, a pretty big layoff after that. And it was hard. It was the first time in my life I had to let people go. And then after I did that, it was my turn. And for the first time in my life, I was unemployed, but they were good to me, and I had some time to look around, and I had many options. Within about 3 months, I was looking at going back to one of the broadcast networks that I had never worked for before, or to go work for a mobile company called Virgin Mobile. And being the thrill seeker that I am, I decided I've been there, done that with the networks. Let me go into mobile and learn as much as I can about mobile, because that's going to be really big. And I'm going to need to know about that. It was before the iPhone. And so I went and I worked for Virgin Mobile for a little bit. Even though I only stayed there very briefly, there was a lot that we did that I think were first evers, and it was a feather in my cap, and I have no regrets. It was fun. It was a little far from home. And, at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm the guy to work for a phone company. But if you're ever going to go work for the phone company, work for Richard Branson's phone company.
The perks must be great. I want to go back to something. When you were let go from the WWE or WWF at that time, I remember in my career, the first time that I was fired, I was angry. It took me some time to get through it. And, I think you have to grow up quite a bit to get through something like that. I'm just curious what
Yeah.
your experience was, how you reacted to
Yeah.
it, and how long it took you to get through it, if at all.
Yeah. My kids were in diapers at the time. And so I was scared shitless. And I was a little bit angry to some degree because we had done some amazing things. But I was really, if I look back, I really was ready to move on. I don't look back a lot. I just look
Yeah.
forward. But you're forcing me to do that. So, and there was so much more for me to do and to learn. And I've just never been someone who thought that I would spend, 30, 40 years. I have the utmost respect for people who stay at one company or stay in one job for decades. I think it's amazing. I don't know how they do it. I'm in awe of it. But I think I have too much ADD in my brain to do something like that. And I really have to love the product and see the vision of it and understand it to be a good marketer for it.
How have you been able to recognize trends? It seems to me that like a lot of what your career has been, not simply taking advantage of the opportunities given to you, but also having the ability to have a wider view of the horizon. Whether it was the internet is here, this is the future. Granted, many of the people around me don't see it, but this is it. Virgin Mobile. I want to take advantage of this new landscape. How have you always been able to trust your gut in that sense? And what has it been that's kind of motivated you to say, okay, this is the right path forward?
It's a great question. I mean, look, you don't trust your gut all the time. You're taking a leap of faith, right? And you know that it might not work out. And as much as I learned working for Virgin Mobile, it wasn't the right place for me. It just, for a lot of different reasons. And I left pretty quickly. Um, and, but I learned about something that was going to become very important in the future. How I knew that, I don't know. It's being in an agency environment or being in a corporate environment. A lot of it is, first of all, you have to read a ton. You're just always keeping up on everything, and you have to be passionate and curious about everything in culture. But the other part is you have to surround yourself with a team of people and be a part of a team where you're listening all the time. You're seeing, now I'm a lot older, but back then I was in my 20s and early 30s. But now it's about seeing what this new generation, next culture is really focused on and what they're doing, and respecting that. Like I'll tell you, when I was on the ad agency side and Twitter first launched, I was like, who the hell is going to use this thing? Like I was the naysayer, and I caught myself, probably a little bit late on that one, but I realized I don't want to be that guy that I ran into at NBC who said no. And so you start to say, okay, well, you don't have to bet the farm, but you need to always test and learn and be respectful of what's new and next until it's either going to be successful or it's not. But you can't ignore it. You just can't ignore it.
Yeah, you have to lean in, no doubt.
Yeah.
So you leave Virgin, and what was the next step?
What's the next step? That's when my old mentor and friend and former boss, Alan Cohen, called me up and said, I'm going to go over to this sleepy old, they're going to be really pissed that I'm characterized, but this is the truth. This was the phone call. And media agency, this sleepy old media agency, and I'd love for you to come and help me, turn it into something more dynamic, because I really believe media, paid media and media agencies are going to go from being kind of the last thought in the meeting to the first thought in the meeting. And again, he just had this understanding, and he knew better than I did what the future was going to be. And I said, why would I want to go to a sleepy old media agency? And he said, because we're going to reinvent it, and that's what we're good at. And I said, okay. I was kind of working with a couple of former colleagues at the WWF doing some consulting. And I was like, I really did need a full-time gig because my kids were so young and I needed to pay for their future college education. So I agreed, and I went to work for Initiative, and I started working. We won the CBS business and Fuse and some other entertainment business, but also started working with brands across other categories, and was working both. I think the title was VP of Entertainment and Innovation. It was the best title I've ever had. Right, it combined the two things I love the most, and so that's when we started working with CBS Television Network, and my relationship with George Schweitzer at CBS began. I became George's guy and his account guy, and really was exposed to the world of paid media and media agencies. What I just didn't know what I didn't know, because I was an interloper. Most media agencies really hire from within and promote people from within. So here's this guy who came from the broadcast side, who came from the WWF. I was an anomaly at the time at a media agency. And so, I didn't know any better. I think it's what's called the new mind approach, right? But I was stumbling into it, and I was sitting in meetings. Showtime was a client, and I thought I was working for a creative agency. I mean, I knew I wasn't, but I would just sit there all day long pitching ideas of how to launch the show, what we could do with the key art. And one day I had this thought with the launch of Weeds season 2. I don't know if you guys remember the show, a great show on Showtime, Mary Louise Parker, that we should take, and this is before social media, the internet was still kind of like, percolating. But, Facebook, I don't think even existed. YouTube was just becoming something. So we were still looking at print as a pretty viable media platform. And I looked at the key art, CMO by the name of Len Foji, who also is a great friend and mentor of mine, was our client. And I said, what if you created a print ad in Rolling Stone with this beautiful key art that you have for the show, and you turned it into one of those perfume ads where you just peel back the side and you can smell the beautiful scent of your favorite Led Zeppelin concert. And
I see where we're going.
Len, so I think I had the foresight to say, okay, let me mock this up for him, because I don't think just me saying it would get, and by the way, marijuana was not legal anywhere. And he was like, that's awesome. Let's, in fact, fast forward, he became one of my clients with Venti Marketing. And I think I brought him a copy of it, 15 plus years later. But yeah, so we created the first ever marijuana scented print ad, which almost never happened because believe it or not, Rolling Stone got cold feet. And
I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah. Jan called up and said, I don't think we can do this. Our lawyers are telling us we can't do this. And I was just like, hey, the client's already bought into it. It's already been created. We can't go back now. Like, we have to do it. And we did it. And man, it was a sensation. It was a press sensation. It was awesome. And it helped launch the show. There was a lot of other great work and marketing that went into the show. But that was just kind of my first foray into working at an ad agency.
And I remember, you won awards for that. I think you and I actually worked together on that a little bit way back when.
Yeah. I think that's around when we started.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, going forward from there, you're now building out these creative campaigns. You're tapping into all different types of media. You already have the skill set. You already have the chops. Now you're just taking it to another level. Take us to LA. You go out west and tell us how the opportunity to go lead one of the largest ad agencies on earth presented itself, and talk to us about that role and what that meant to your career and your journey.
Well, I don't want to go back, but the marijuana scented thing, it turns out that the agency was the AOR for the Drug Council. And the president of the agency. So I didn't know. I'm
AOR
so
meaning agency of record.
I'm so new at the agency that I have no clue who these clients are, right? One of the presidents of the agency comes to my desk and starts yelling at me. And I'm like, I'm going to get fired. I mean, my client thinks I'm brilliant, but my company is going to fire me for doing this. Ultimately, we also got a letter from the White House sanctioning
Oh,
us and stuff.
geez.
And I think I brought
You
that
did
to
a good thing then.
Showtime.
You absolutely know you did a good thing then. If
Yeah,
that's the response.
I brought the letter to Showtime and I said, "This is what success looks like."
You're right. You're right.
Absolutely.
We caught everybody's
Yeah,
attention.
yeah, exactly. So fast forward, so we're about 2.5 years into the IPG gig, and Alan gets recruited to become the CEO of OMD. Ironically, Alan was out on the West Coast with IPG with Initiative, and I was on the East Coast in New York because of my WWE days. And I hadn't relocated back to the West Coast. Alan calls me up and he's like, I can't talk to you about this job, but you're going to get a phone call from Paige Thompson, who was the head of the agency at the time. And so I go and have a drink uptown in New York with Paige, and he tells me that they need someone to run the West Coast office. And I'm only 2 years into an agency gig. I don't know what I don't know, but it's hard for me to say no because I've got my wife who's from California. Alan was a mentor of mine. He's someone I admired greatly, and to work with him now in a CEO capacity at the agency. And Apple was a big client of theirs out on the West Coast. So the client roster was already enviable. And I was just like, how do I say no to this, And so that's, I didn't. I went and I jumped off the cliff again and relocated the entire family back to the West Coast. And that was right as the market was collapsing and everyone on Wall Street was losing their jobs in 2008. And the advertising marketplace also did fall off a cliff to some degree. So it was a big gulp moment when I got there, and all of a sudden we were stuck with the house back in Connecticut, and we're renting a place in California, in Los Angeles, which is not cheap. And every single day, and I had about 150 people at the time all of a sudden under my purview. And I think, again, it gets back to just, knowing what's right. And I think there was a defining meeting in the heart of the recession where clients were leaving. I called it the leaky bucket. A client would leave and then maybe we would fill it with something else, but it was very difficult. It was, and the goal was the goal wasn't to like all of a sudden crush your numbers that year. The goal was to stop the leaking. And we walked into a meeting one day and I just said to everyone, guys, we're no longer in the ad business. We're in the saving jobs business. I said, look at the person next to you. Do you want to see that person out on the street tomorrow into this abyss? Because no one knew, if you remember, in 2008, no one knew how long it was going to take if you lost your job. And I said, we're all here to support each other. We're all here to save each other's jobs. And if anybody knows any piece of business, any way we can grow, any way we can save money, we're all in this together. And we pitched pretty much everything that moved.
Wow.
And that's when I went from not really being a salesman to becoming a salesman. I still think I have a lot of room to improve. But we pitched just about everything and we did better than pretty much on any other agency. And I would say any other region of OMD or Omnicom through that time. And what I didn't know at the time was that I was creating this loyal team of senior media people who stayed with me for a decade at that agency, which is almost unheard of, right? There was this loyalty. We lost a lot of good people. People left, and for good reason. You leave for more money, you leave for whatever. But to have that continuity helped us keep stickiness with our clients, and to help, it helped every part of the business, right? And I needed those people because I didn't know what I didn't know. I was very honest with everyone. I didn't grow up in the media agency world. I grew up in this crazy world, and so they needed to show me the nuts and bolts of what, an assistant planner and a planner and a buyer and every single role in the agency did. But I did have something. I had an open mind and I had a healthy respect for every single person in the agency. It didn't matter who you were. You could be the security guard You could be the person in the cafeteria. You played an instrumental role in helping this agency succeed. And that was my mentality all the time. Everyone deserved the mutual respect of everyone. Just because I hated the title, right? And it's like people feared me because of my title. I hated that. I wanted everyone to know that everyone was equal in the agency. Now, obviously, you have levels and you have hierarchies and everything else, but it all started with that kind of mutual respect because I needed to, trust people to bring me along and mentor me who were junior to me, people who were 20, 30 years in the ad game, and I was 2 years in the ad game, and I needed them to respect me and follow me in some regard as a leader. And so that was, in my mind, that was the best way to build mutual respect.
You had a lot of pressure on you, obviously, being a CEO, obviously having so many people underneath you, and as you said, during the financial crisis, the pressure upped itself. Being that you said you were not about building portfolios, you were about saving people's jobs, keeping everybody, saving lives in some senses. Did the pressure ever get to the point where you said, I need to step away from something like this?
Yeah, tremendously. I used to have a full head of hair.
For those people not seeing the Zoom, Greg has a very shiny head like I do.
Over the course of 10 years, I spent 10 years at OMD. And by the way, I wasn't the CEO. I was the president of the West Coast region, which, by the way, was still somewhere in the ballpark of $3 billion under management. So it was a huge, pretty vast. And we took it there. I think, in the time that I was there, I think we added about $1 billion to that. And we doubled the size or tripled the size of the agency in people and in billings and in clients. And it was a really successful time for everyone there. And it was because of the team, because of just some really smart people and throughout the agency, not just on the West Coast. We leaned heavily on people in Chicago and New York, the best people we possibly could bring to the table when we were trying to win new business or expand organically our business. We just kept pushing forward, but it was very difficult. You're wearing so many hats, and I was pulled away from the creativity that I came from, and I was much more leaning into operations, working with finance, working with HR, and they were great people. And we did, it was fascinating and interesting work, but it just wasn't my passion. So you're pulled into this management role and you're troubleshooting, you're a fireman, you're putting out fires all the time, right? You barely have time to think about, something creative for a client. The time when you could do that was in new business, right? So anytime you had a new business pitch, that's where you could kind of clear the decks and say, nothing's more important than us coming up with brilliant ideas for this pitch so we can win the business. And so I started to really enjoy that, right? Because that was my creative outlet to some degree. But even that was very difficult. The hours were brutal. 7 days a week. I'm a 2 million miler on American, and I've flown many other airlines, so you just, that goes back to my WWE days, lots of travel, and, pulling me away from my family. And that was very difficult.
And I'm sure, a lot of that is why you eventually pivoted away from the big agency life and decided to take greater control, I would think, of your life, of your lifestyle by setting up your own practice, so to speak.
Yeah, it was like the second time in my career where I wasn't making the choice for myself. The company, when you think about what's happening with analytics and digital and AI and technology, the innovation begs for centralization, right? The marketplace is so fragmented, and these technologies are allowing some of these companies to take back control at the center. And so they started looking at this regional structure, and they said, why do we need that? Right? We can just control everything from New York and just have people on the ground to manage clients, that needed some hand-holding, but it's all going to be part of this kind of platform in the future. So so technology really, I think, was part of the restructuring, and I got restructured out. All of the presidents of all of the regions got restructured. And there I was again, and within about a week, Publicis came calling. And I made the mistake to jump back into running the West Coast for another big holding company. And then COVID hit,
Yeah.
and that's when I really started taking stock and decided this isn't really what I want to do anymore. And I need to take back control of my life. And unfortunately, during that time, Carrie and I went through some personal tragedy in our families and stuff like that. So we really decided to change kind of our latitude a bit and say, we want to focus on the things that are truly important in this world, which are our families and our friends. But we still need to make a living. But we're just not going to do it at the behest of some corporate behemoth anymore. And I started my first consultancy, which I had the great fortune of that being bought by a small independent agency. They made me COO for a bit. And then COVID ended, and I was free from my shackles of my house and office. And I decided to take some time off and then start my own consultancy again. And that's Venti Marketing for the last 2 years.
So you have obviously been a person who's kind of seeing the future. I mean, if anything, you're kind of a futurist in that sense. Whether it be the internet, whether it be mobile. You mentioned AI a moment ago. What is the future that we see right now? What is the next big tech future?
I actually wrote it. I wrote an article. I wrote several articles called The Futurist for a marketing magazine when I was at IPG. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I don't know if I can see the future. I really don't. But and it's overused, and you're going to hear it from everybody. But AI is going to be, and it has already been, that prolific. It's mind-boggling. You can't wrap your head around the immense change that is coming. And I've had these conversations with my daughters, as they start to make career choices and things like that. You can just try to stay ahead of it and try to use the tools that are emerging so rapidly and integrate them into what you do and how you use them in whatever you do in your career or life. But you can't ignore it. And you can't be that person that says, oh, it's ham radio.
Not anymore. You sure can't. No way.
You have, yeah, you can't. Right. I mean, there are companies making serious money from AI right now. It's not a joke. It is happening. And, I think the agency world in particular, especially the holding companies, there's a reason why Omnicom just reported decent revenue, and we're still looking for some better margin, but it's coming because they're just not going to need all those people anymore, right? And it's a cold hard fact, and they're not willing to say it. A lot of the agencies aren't willing to say it, but it's true. It's coming. You can use 1 or 2 people where there used to be 10 to do competitive analysis, to do planning. And I'm all for humans. I love humans. I want humans to have all the jobs, but it's just not the reality anymore. There's a reason why Horizon just did a big deal and partnered with an AI company, because they see those margin dreams. They understand that all of those FTEs, full-time employees, and it's not driving them. They know they need the technology, and they need the information, and they need the insights that it's going to give them to be better for their clients. All of that is true, but it's also going to create efficiencies. And if you're in business, efficiency is just as important as growth, right? So there you have it. I said it out loud.
So if you're a young person trying to break into this business now, is it a good business to go into? Like what advice would you tell somebody who's 22 years old who says, I want to get into advertising? Would you encourage them to look further? I guess that's my first question.
Yes, absolutely. Because I can't predict what the future is going to hold, right? It may be more like, instead of having a team of 10 people, it's you, one other person, and AI, right, that you're interfacing with. So you've got to understand how to work with AI. There will be this interim period where prompting will be a thing. but that's even going to go away as AI becomes natural in its language and in its interface and in the way it just talks back at you, right? You think about the early days of chatbots, right? It's literally going to be like another human being on your team, or 20 human beings on your team. So there are still going to be humans somewhere in the mix. Where they're going to be is hard to decipher. I think account management is going to be one of those places where clients are still going to want to interface with a real person, right? So yes, I think you're still going to need to know everything about the business, but there just could be fewer opportunities.
And in terms of differentiating yourself to break into this business, what should a person do?
Well, there's a lot of certifications you can get, whether it's with social media, whether it's with AI, whether it's with programmatic, whether it's trade desk. But showing that you have intent and showing that you're learning all the time and that you're taking courses and you're doing internships, and it's that intention that's so important, right? And you're a learner, you're curious, you're passionate. I know it's all platitudes, but you have to show that intent that you want to be in this business. And there are going to be people who are then going to pick you up from, the lapel and say, okay, we're going to let you be in this business and we're going to give you a shot and a chance. But if you're just kind of meandering around and saying, I don't really know what I want to do, I'll give this a shot, that's not going to work for you. You've got to take intentional action forward, whether it's learning, courses, certificates, internships, whatever it may be, and, just pour yourself into it.
And then the final question, as somebody who's been in this business for 35 years, who's been up, down, you've seen all kinds of incredible things. Like, if you had words of wisdom to share from the journey that you've taken to anybody from any industry, like what should people know and take away from your journey?
I appreciate that question. I really do. For me, it took me a while to have fun. I was nervous. I was a stress ball. I was working in in a fun business, but I was stressed out all the time. I would say, be confident, have fun, find the joy in what you're doing, even if you're over your skis and jumping off a cliff into the unknown, and focus on the things that matter the most. For me, the reason I worked that hard and I dedicated so much time was for a higher purpose. I wanted my family and my kids to have a good life. That's what I was doing it for. And I wanted to have some fun along the way, and I learned how to have fun along the way, and work for good people. Don't tolerate bad people. Don't tolerate toxic people. Edit them out of your life and move on. And you're going to run into those people wherever you go, in life, in jobs. But you've got to kind of ignore that and just look forward and get past it really fast, because you're going to find really great people along the way, more great people than bad people.
And as I've learned in my career, that's all that matters, are the people.
It's all that
that's
matters.
it.
Relationships.
There you go.
And relationships with some AI bot in the future.
Right. We have to keep evolving and keep learning. Well, Greg, this has been such a great conversation. A wonderful walk through the history of advertising, which I think says something about our age.
You are the history of advertising.
No, not at all. Nice. I feel like I came in the midpoint. I got airdropped in. But that's what happens when you're 35 years into a career. But I get bored of listening to my own voice, so I hope this isn't too boring for your viewers and listeners.
Absolutely not. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So that was the marketing executive, Greg Castronuovo, as I mentioned off the top, a good friend of mine and fortunately supporter and advocate of the show. So Greg, thank you for all of that. Larry Shea, what are your thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. I took so many valuable, important lessons, and I hope all of our listeners did as well. The idea that you should never make the same mistake twice, I think, is incredible. The story about faxing the numbers to the woman, and it was a mistake, and he fessed up to it right away. What a great story about just owning up to your mistakes. There seems to be like an overarching theme with Greg that loss is more motivating than a win. That it took him a while to have fun, right? That you should be confident, you should have fun, and find the joy in what you're doing. I think is a really, really valuable lesson. And he also talks about something that we don't talk enough about on this show, and that's getting fired, right? Literally, when you're climbing that mountain to success, you're going to have some failures. It's a greased pole. It's a greased world. You're going to fall down. And so how do you fall down? How do you pick yourself back up? So many valuable lessons I took from Greg here. And my favorite story, of course, was the Page jacket that he would wear to interviews, and he should have kept that patch on.
I feel like I've done something like that. In my past.
Love it. So great stories and a lot of valuable lessons.
The one thing I took from Greg's story was the notion of accountability. As you said before, like he copped to making a mistake. We all make mistakes, right? That I think they all say we're all human and we all make mistakes. So if you're able to at least cop to the mistakes that you make, people will see that as like a real character building kind of trait. It's a good thing to do. I mean, obviously you don't want to make mistakes all the time, but when you do, and you do at least come forward and say, look, that's on me, for the most part, people are going to be like, okay, we'll give you a pass and we know you won't do it again. I think that's a very, very good trait to have. The other one, which I thought was, the notion of not surrounding yourself with toxic people, and you should also not be a toxic person, right? I say it all the time. More than half of your ability to get that next job is just not being a jerk, right? Let people, if you're a likable person, people will want to work with you and will want to help you down the line. That's always how it is. It's a contact sport, right? The more people you know, the further you'll go. That's a really, really smart piece of advice. And then I guess finally, the one thing is, finding joy in what you do, right? I mean, if you don't like what you do, why do it? I mean, that is so, so important, so key in any job you have. And you're 100% right, Shay. We never talk enough about being fired. Like in my own career path, I have been fired. And I got to tell you, it devastated me for a while. But the one thing I always knew is that if I continue on the path that I'm moving forward on, everything will be all right in the end. And I'm doing all right. Yes, I was fired. It really is a shock to the system the first time that happens. And then afterwards, you understand there is a light at the end of the tunnel and you can succeed from failure.
And that's really what our show is all about. If you think about the title of No Wrong Choices, it's all about learning from every single experience along the way and pulling something from it that can help you in the next phase of your journey. And being fired can absolutely make you stronger and more aware, et cetera, et cetera. So it certainly stuck with our theme without a doubt. One of the things that I took away from this conversation was leadership. We've talked about this before with some others, but Greg reinforced it. Lead through compassion, lead through empathy. And he walked into a big change and a big project when he went out to California to run OMD out there. And, he needed to be humble and say, hey, I have not done this before. This is new to me. I need your help. And he checked his ego at the door and he surrounded himself by the right people. He led with compassion and they were unbelievably successful. So to me, that was a very big takeaway. And then moving beyond that, just in terms of where the industry is going, this in many ways really was a walk through the history of advertising. And Greg, came in at a great time. And it's now entered a time of, I don't want to call it turmoil, but there's a lot of change going on.
Flux is probably the way. Flux, yeah.
There's a lot of scary change going on right now. And AI is undoubtedly pushing a lot of that. And I think Greg gave us a really helpful and meaningful perspective on, where this industry may go and how people need to prepare themselves for what may be in front of them. So just so many valuable lessons here. Greg is a talented, smart guy, has been around. That was incredibly helpful to me. For anybody out there who would like to get to know Greg better, make sure you check out his website, ventimarketing.com. That is the site for his business, VENTI marketing.com. I'm sure he can be of great service to you. So with that, Greg Castronuovo, thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of Tushar Saxena, Larry Shea, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. If after listening you've thought of someone who could be a great guest, please let us know by sending us a note via the contact page of our website at NoWrongChoices.com. While there, please be sure to check out our blog and explore other great episodes while signing up to become a member of our community. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, and X. TikTok is up and content has begun rolling out. We'll be back with another episode next week. Before then, always remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success, only opportunities, because we learn from every experience.